4 years ago, I was basically unemployed. A wanderer. $500 million.
There were 7 kingdoms. And the Trident was cursed. If you lead, the 7 kingdoms will follow.
Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023, Part 1 Long Review. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is a 2023 action-adventure superhero film directed by James Wan and starring Jason Momoa as Arthur Curry, also known as Aquaman, with Patrick Wilson as Orm, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Black Manta, Amber Heard as Mera, Nicole Kidman as Atlanta, Tamwara Morrison as Tom Curry, Dolph Lundgren as King Nerus, and Randall Park as Dr. Stephen Shin. The film is the sequel to Aquaman and continues Arthur Curry's journey after he has become the King of Atlantis. The story combines underwater fantasy, superhero action, family drama, ancient mythology, and large-scale adventure, while placing greater attention on Arthur's responsibilities as a king, husband, and new father. The movie begins by showing how much Arthur's life has changed since the events of the first film. He is no longer simply a reluctant hero discovering his identity. He is now responsible for an entire underwater civilization and must balance his duties in Atlantis with his connection to the surface world. Arthur's position as king creates a completely different kind of challenge because being powerful does not automatically make ruling a kingdom easy. He has to deal with political problems, environmental issues, enemies, and the responsibility of protecting millions of people. At the same time, he has become a father, which adds another emotional dimension to his character. Instead of fighting only for himself, Arthur now has a family that he wants to protect. This makes his motivation more personal and gives the story a stronger family-centered element. Arthur remains the same humorous and energetic character played by Jason Momoa, but his circumstances have changed. He can no longer simply jump into danger without considering the consequences because his decisions affect Atlantis and the people he loves. The movie therefore begins with the idea that being a king is much harder than becoming one. Arthur may have won the throne, but earning the respect of an entire civilization and managing its problems is a completely different challenge. Atlantis itself continues to be one of the film's biggest visual attractions. The underwater world is filled with futuristic technology, enormous creatures, colorful landscapes, ancient structures, and different underwater civilizations. James Wan once again uses the ocean as a massive fantasy environment rather than simply treating it as a background. The underwater world feels almost limitless, with different kingdoms and mysterious locations waiting to be explored. This sense of scale is important because the title itself suggests that there are still secrets hidden beneath the oceans. Arthur's journey is therefore not simply about protecting Atlantis, it is also about discovering forgotten parts of the underwater world. While Arthur is trying to manage his responsibilities, David Kane, better known as Black Manta, continues to carry a deep hatred toward him. Black Manta's motivation is connected to the death of his father, and he remains determined to destroy Arthur. Unlike Arthur, who is now trying to protect his family and kingdom, Black Manta is driven almost completely by revenge. His obsession makes him dangerous because he is willing to take enormous risks to achieve his goal. Yahya Abdul Mateen II gives Black Manta a powerful physical presence, and the character's return provides the movie with a villain who has a personal connection to the hero. This makes their conflict more emotionally meaningful than a simple battle between good and evil. Black Manta does not want to conquer Atlantis merely because he wants power. He wants Arthur to suffer. He wants revenge, and that revenge becomes even more dangerous when he discovers an ancient weapon known as the Black Trident. According to the film's official DC synopsis, the Black Trident gives Black Manta access to an ancient and malevolent force, making him a much more formidable threat than before. The Black Trident introduces a darker mythological element into the story. Instead of relying only on advanced Atlantean technology, the movie connects its villain to an ancient supernatural power. This creates a contrast between Arthur's heroic identity and the mysterious evil connected to the lost history of Atlantis. The weapon is not simply a tool. It represents something dangerous from the past that should perhaps have remained hidden. Black Manta's discovery of it changes the scale of the conflict. Arthur is no longer fighting only an enemy who wants revenge. He is facing a force capable of threatening the entire world. This is where the title Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom becomes especially important because the movie expands the mythology of Atlantis and introduces the idea of forgotten kingdoms and ancient powers. The story also brings Orm back into Arthur's life. Orm, played by Patrick Wilson, was Arthur's half-brother and the former king of Atlantis. Their relationship has always been complicated. In the previous film, Orm was Arthur's enemy because he wanted to unite the underwater kingdoms against the surface world. Arthur defeated him and took the throne, leaving Orm imprisoned. Now, however, Arthur realizes that he may need Orm's knowledge and abilities to defeat Black Manta. This creates one of the most interesting relationships in the sequel. Two brothers who once fought for the throne are now forced to work together. The idea of enemies becoming reluctant allies gives the movie a different emotional structure from the first film. Arthur and Orm do not suddenly become best friends. They still have disagreements, different personalities, and unresolved history. Arthur is more relaxed, humorous, and connected to the surface world, while Orm is more serious, proud, and shaped by his identity as a former king. Their contrasting personalities create both conflict and comedy. The official DC description specifically presents their partnership as an unlikely alliance in which they must put aside their differences to protect Atlantis, Arthur's family, and the world. This brotherly relationship becomes one of the strongest aspects of the sequel because it gives the story a personal emotional core. Arthur has spent much of his life feeling separated from both worlds. He is half human and half Atlantean, and his relationship with Orm is complicated by the fact that they share a father but were raised in very different environments. Orm grew up inside Atlantean royalty and believed deeply in the superiority and importance of Atlantis, while Arthur grew up largely on the surface with his human father. Their differences created conflict in the first movie, but the sequel gives them an opportunity to understand each other. The forced partnership allows them to discover that they may have more in common than they originally believed. Both care about their family and both have strong ideas about how Atlantis should be protected. The difference is that they approach those responsibilities in completely different ways. Arthur's relationship with Orm is also important because Arthur now understands what it means to carry the weight of the throne. When Orm was king, Arthur saw him primarily as an enemy who wanted power. Now that Arthur himself is king, he begins to understand the pressures Orm faced. This creates an opportunity for the brothers to see each other differently. Their relationship is therefore not only about defeating Black Manta, it is also about healing an old family conflict. At the same time, Mera remains an important part of Arthur's life. She is now the queen of Atlantis and the mother of Arthur's child. Her role adds another dimension to Arthur's responsibilities because he is no longer fighting simply as a superhero. He is fighting as a husband and father. The family dynamic makes Black Manta's threat more personal because he is targeting the people closest to Arthur. Arthur's desire to protect his family becomes one of the main emotional motivations of the story. The danger is no longer abstract. It is something that can reach his home and his child. This makes the stakes feel more immediate. Nicole Kidman's Atlanta also continues to represent the connection between Arthur's human and Atlantean heritage. She is a warrior and a mother, and her presence reinforces the importance of family throughout the story. Temuera Morrison returns as Arthur's father, Tom Curry, continuing the connection between Arthur and the surface world. This family structure is important because Aquaman has always been a character caught between two worlds. He belongs to Atlantis but also loves the human world. He is a king underwater but still has a strong connection to the lighthouse and his father's simple way of life. The sequel continues exploring this dual identity while adding the responsibilities of fatherhood. One of the interesting changes in Arthur is that he is more comfortable with his role as Aquaman. In the first film, he had to discover whether he was willing to accept his Atlantean heritage and become a leader. In this film, he already knows who he is, but he must learn how to rule effectively. This creates a different kind of character journey. Becoming king was about identity, remaining king is about responsibility. Arthur's humorous personality remains important because it prevents the character from becoming too serious. Jason Momoa's performance continues to give Arthur a relaxed, charismatic energy that separates him from many traditional superhero characters. Even when the situation is dangerous, Arthur often responds with humor and confidence. This makes the action scenes more entertaining and keeps the movie from becoming overly heavy. However, underneath the humor is a character who has matured because he now understands what he has to lose. Black Manta's return creates the opposite emotional energy. He is more focused, darker, and more determined than before. His obsession with revenge pushes him toward increasingly dangerous decisions. He is willing to use ancient forces because his hatred for Arthur has become more important to him than his own safety. This makes him a dangerous opponent. The Black Trident also appears to influence the scale of his ambition, connecting him to an ancient power that threatens more than just Arthur. The conflict therefore becomes a battle between Arthur's responsibility to protect life and Black Manta's desire to destroy the person he blames for his suffering. The movie also introduces the idea that ancient powers can have consequences for the modern world. The Black Trident is associated with a forgotten history and a malevolent force, suggesting that Atlantis has secrets that even its current rulers do not completely understand. This adds mystery to the story. Arthur and Orm are not simply fighting an enemy, they are investigating a piece of history that has been hidden for a very long time. The search for answers leads them toward locations that expand the world of Aquaman. This world building is one of the film's major strengths because the ocean provides endless possibilities for fantasy storytelling. Unlike many superhero movies that are limited to cities and familiar environments, Aquaman can travel through underwater kingdoms, icy regions, ancient ruins, and strange ecosystems. This gives the film a sense of adventure similar to a fantasy expedition. The visual effects are designed to make these environments feel enormous. The movie's runtime is about 2 hours and 4 minutes, allowing it to move quickly between action, adventure, family drama, and comedy. The action is a major part of the film's identity. Arthur is one of the physically strongest heroes in the DC universe, and the sequel gives him numerous opportunities to demonstrate his abilities. He can fight underwater, communicate with sea creatures, move at incredible speed, and use his strength to battle powerful enemies. His combat style is energetic and physical, matching Jason Momoa's screen presence. However, the movie also uses Orm's fighting style to create contrast. Orm is trained as a royal warrior and fights with a more formal, disciplined approach. When the two brothers fight together, their differences become part of the entertainment. One is more instinctive and improvisational, while the other is more controlled and traditional. Their teamwork is therefore not perfect, but that imperfection creates some of the film's most enjoyable moments. Their relationship gradually becomes the heart of the adventure. The movie understands that a superhero story can become more entertaining when the heroes have personal disagreements. Arthur and Orm do not always agree about how to solve problems, and their arguments create humor. At the same time, their shared history gives the conflict emotional depth. Every time they cooperate, the audience remembers that these two characters were once enemies. Their alliance therefore represents a form of family reconciliation. They may not completely resolve their past, but they begin building a new relationship based on mutual necessity and eventually mutual respect. The film's exploration of family is not limited to Arthur and Orm. Arthur's relationship with his own child changes the way he sees danger. As a father, he is more protective and more aware of consequences. This creates a contrast with his younger, more reckless personality. The Arthur of the sequel is still capable of taking huge risks, but now those risks affect a family that depends on him. The story therefore asks what kind of King Arthur wants to be. Does he want to be a warrior who defeats every enemy through strength, or does he want to become a leader who creates stability and protects future generations? This question gives his character a stronger emotional foundation. Another important element is the relationship between Atlantis and the surface world. Arthur's unique position allows him to understand both sides. He knows that humans have often misunderstood Atlantis, while Atlanteans can also misunderstand humans. His rule offers an opportunity to create better communication between the two worlds. However, the sequel shows that such political change is not easy. Arthur faces resistance and practical problems, and he must learn how to manage a civilization rather than simply defend it. This expands the character beyond the traditional superhero role. He is now a ruler dealing with problems that cannot always be solved by punching a villain. The film also incorporates environmental themes through its portrayal of the relationship between the ocean and the surface world. Atlantis has technology and resources that humans do not understand, while the surface world has its own environmental problems. The connection between the two worlds suggests that damage to one can eventually affect the other. This gives the fantasy story a real-world dimension without overwhelming the action. Arthur's position between the two worlds makes him uniquely suited to understand this connection. He is both human and Atlantean, so he can see the consequences of conflict from both perspectives. Dr. Stephen Shin, played by Randall Park, continues investigating Atlantis and its technology. His curiosity represents humanity's desire to understand the underwater civilization. However, the pursuit of knowledge can also become dangerous when people seek powerful technology without understanding its consequences. This is another theme that runs through the story. Atlantis possesses ancient technology and knowledge, but not everything that can be discovered should necessarily be used. Black Manta's search for Atlantean artifacts demonstrates how dangerous that knowledge can become in the wrong hands. The film's title, The Lost Kingdom, therefore suggests more than a geographical location. It represents forgotten knowledge, hidden history, and ancient power. The characters are entering a part of Atlantis's history that has been buried for a reason. This gives the adventure a mysterious quality. The story begins as a superhero conflict but gradually becomes an exploration of ancient mythology. The deeper Arthur and Orm go into the mystery, the more they discover about the history of their people. This creates a sense that the underwater world is much larger and older than the characters previously understood. The movie also uses comedy to balance its darker elements. Arthur and Orm's personalities naturally create humorous situations, especially because Orm is more serious while Arthur is much more relaxed. Their partnership resembles a reluctant buddy team dynamic. One brother is confident and playful, while the other is frustrated by his brother's attitude. This dynamic allows the movie to explore family conflict without becoming too heavy. Their arguments can be funny, but beneath the humor is a genuine emotional story about two brothers who were separated by politics and resentment. Patrick Wilson's performance as Orm is especially important because he must show the character's transformation from antagonist to reluctant ally. Orm has not suddenly forgotten his past, and his pride remains strong. He is still a man who once believed he should rule Atlantis. Being forced to depend on Arthur is therefore humiliating for him. Yet the circumstances force him to cooperate, and through that cooperation he begins to see Arthur differently. Arthur also learns to see Orm as more than the villain he defeated. This mutual change creates one of the most satisfying character developments in the film. The movie's action-adventure structure gives the brothers a clear goal: stop Black Manta before the ancient power he has awakened causes catastrophic destruction. The official synopsis describes their mission as protecting Atlantis, Arthur's family, and the world from irreversible destruction. This makes the stakes enormous, but the personal relationship between the characters keeps the story grounded. Even though the threat is global, the audience understands why Arthur personally needs to stop Black Manta. The villain represents unfinished business from Arthur's past, while Orm represents a complicated part of Arthur's family history. These two conflicts come together in the sequel. The story therefore becomes a combination of external adventure and internal family drama. Arthur has to defeat Black Manta while also learning how to work with the brother who once tried to defeat him. This dual challenge gives the film more emotional structure than a simple superhero battle. Visually, the film continues the colorful underwater style established by the first Aquaman. The ocean is presented as a fantasy universe full of strange creatures, massive structures, advanced technology, and dramatic landscapes. The underwater action allows the filmmakers to create battles that could not easily exist in ordinary superhero environments. Characters can move in 3 dimensions, creatures can attack from unexpected directions, and enormous underwater vehicles can travel through the environment. This creates a distinctive action style. The film also moves outside the ocean to locations such as the surface world and other extreme environments, expanding the sense of adventure. The story is therefore not limited to Atlantis. It becomes a global and almost mythological journey. The cast helps maintain the movie's connection to the first film while introducing new emotional dynamics. Jason Momoa remains the central presence, while Patrick Wilson becomes much more important because Orm is now part of the heroic journey. Yahya Abdul Mateen too provides the main antagonistic force, and the returning supporting cast reinforces the family and political elements. The official DC page confirms the main returning cast and the film's creative team, including director James Wan, writer David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, and producers Peter Safran, James Wan, and Rob Cowan. The film's music by Rupert Gregson-Williams also contributes to its epic tone, helping connect the action sequences with the emotional moments. As Part 1 comes to an end, the central conflict is clearly established. Arthur Curry is now the king of Atlantis and a father, but his responsibilities have made his life more complicated. Black Manta has returned with a powerful ancient weapon and is more determined than ever to destroy Arthur. The threat is larger than their previous conflict because the Black Trident is connected to an ancient evil force. Arthur realizes that defeating this enemy may require something he never expected: cooperation with his imprisoned half-brother Orm. Their relationship begins as an uneasy alliance built on necessity, but it has the potential to become something more meaningful. The film therefore sets up three major themes for the journey ahead: family, responsibility, and redemption. Arthur must learn how to balance being a king and a father, Orm must confront his past and find a new purpose, and Black Manta's obsession with revenge threatens to destroy everything around him. The adventure that follows is not only a battle for Atlantis but also a test of whether two brothers who once stood on opposite sides can finally fight together. With the lost history of Atlantis, the mysterious Black Trident, the return of Black Manta, and the unexpected partnership between Arthur and Orm, the movie establishes a much larger world and prepares the audience for an adventure filled with underwater battles, ancient secrets, family conflict, humor, and heroic sacrifice. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023, Part 2 Long Review. After establishing Arthur Curry as the king of Atlantis and showing that his greatest enemy Black Manta has returned with the mysterious Black Trident, the story begins to expand the conflict from a personal revenge mission into a threat against Atlantis, the surface world, and Arthur's family. Arthur is now living a life that is completely different from the one he had before becoming king. He has Mera beside him, a young son to protect, and an entire underwater civilization depending on his decisions. Yet being a powerful superhero does not mean that Arthur automatically understands politics. He is a warrior at heart, and he often feels frustrated by the slow-moving political structure of Atlantis. The Royal Council does not always agree with him, and Arthur discovers that simply wanting to improve relations between Atlantis and the surface world is not enough. He has to convince people who have spent generations believing that the surface world is dangerous and untrustworthy. This gives his character a different kind of challenge. In the first movie, Arthur had to prove that he was worthy of becoming king. In this story, he must prove that he can actually govern. That difference is important because leadership is not always about fighting. Sometimes it means listening, negotiating, accepting criticism, and understanding why people disagree with you. Arthur is still learning these skills, and his impatience often creates tension. He wants immediate solutions, especially when he sees problems affecting the ocean, but political systems move much more slowly. This frustration helps explain why he sometimes feels like an outsider even though he is the king. He belongs to Atlantis by blood, but his personality was shaped by the surface world. His human upbringing makes him more open to cooperation with humans, while many Atlanteans remain suspicious of them. Arthur therefore represents a bridge between two civilizations, but being a bridge is difficult because both sides may question where his loyalty truly lies. The environmental problems affecting the oceans make this political conflict even more serious. The underwater world is suffering, and the consequences are beginning to affect the surface as well. Arthur understands that Atlantis cannot remain completely isolated forever. The oceans and the surface world are connected, and damage to one eventually affects the other. This idea gives the movie a meaningful theme beneath its superhero spectacle. Arthur is trying to convince Atlantis that protecting the ocean requires cooperation rather than separation. His position is especially complicated because Atlantis possesses advanced technology and ancient resources that could potentially help solve problems, but using those resources carelessly could create even greater damage. The story introduces orichalcum as an ancient energy source connected to Atlantis's past. It once provided enormous power, but its toxic effects made it dangerous for the environment. The fact that this old resource becomes important again shows how the past can return to create problems for the present. Atlantis may have forgotten some of its ancient mistakes, but the consequences have not disappeared. This idea parallels the return of Black Manta. Arthur thought he had already defeated him, but the enemy's hatred survived. Black Manta is essentially the embodiment of unresolved history. He refuses to let the past remain in the past, and his obsession with revenge turns ancient Atlantean power into a weapon. David Kane's transformation into a more dangerous Black Manta makes the threat much more personal. His hatred is not simply about power or conquest. It is rooted in the death of his father and his belief that Arthur is responsible. This emotional motivation makes him dangerous because he is willing to destroy himself if it means destroying Arthur. The Black Trident intensifies that obsession by giving him access to a supernatural force far beyond ordinary technology. The Trident becomes a symbol of temptation. It offers power to someone who is already consumed by anger, and that combination creates a terrifying result. Black Manta believes he is using the weapon to achieve his revenge, but the ancient force connected to it has its own agenda. This creates an important element of tragedy in his character. He believes he is controlling the power, but the audience gradually understands that the power may also be controlling him. His desire for revenge becomes the doorway through which something much older and darker enters the modern world. Arthur's response to this threat is complicated by the fact that he needs someone with knowledge of Atlantis's ancient history. That person is Orm. The former king of Atlantis is now imprisoned, stripped of his authority, and forced to live with the consequences of his previous actions. Orm's situation creates an interesting contrast with Arthur's position. Arthur has everything Orm once wanted: the throne, political authority, the respect of many Atlanteans, and a family, but he also has responsibilities that Orm did not fully understand when he was king. Orm, meanwhile, has lost his kingdom but still possesses knowledge and abilities that Arthur needs. This creates a fascinating reversal. The former enemies now depend on each other. Arthur cannot simply command Orm as though he were an ordinary prisoner because he needs his cooperation. Orm cannot simply reject Arthur because the threat is too great to ignore. Their alliance begins with necessity rather than friendship. This is important because it prevents the relationship from becoming unrealistic. The brothers still carry resentment and pride. Arthur remembers fighting Orm for the throne, while Orm remembers being defeated and losing everything. Their conversations are therefore filled with tension. Arthur's humor often clashes with Orm's seriousness, creating a buddy adventure dynamic that gives the movie much of its comedy. Orm is accustomed to royal formality, while Arthur is more casual and unpredictable. This difference makes their partnership entertaining, but it also reveals how differently they were raised. Orm spent his life believing that the throne defined him. Arthur grew up without even knowing that he was destined to become king. One brother spent his life preparing for power, while the other discovered power almost by accident. Their different experiences shaped their personalities. Orm believes in hierarchy and tradition, while Arthur values freedom and personal judgment. When they are forced to travel together, these differences repeatedly create conflict. Yet those same differences eventually become strengths. Arthur brings adaptability and a connection to the surface world, while Orm brings knowledge of Atlantean traditions and military strategy. Alone, neither brother is perfectly suited to the challenge. Together, they become stronger. This is one of the central ideas of the movie. People who are different can accomplish more when they learn to cooperate rather than compete. Their relationship also explores the idea of redemption. Orm is not suddenly transformed into a completely different person. He still carries pride, anger, and a desire to regain some sense of dignity. But his circumstances force him to reconsider what it means to be a leader. When he was king, he believed power meant controlling Atlantis and protecting it through strength. Now, after losing the throne, he has an opportunity to understand leadership from another perspective. He sees Arthur making mistakes and begins to understand that ruling is more complicated than he once believed. Arthur also learns from Orm. He discovers that the brother he once viewed as simply an enemy actually possesses knowledge and qualities that can be valuable. Their journey therefore becomes a process of mutual recognition. They begin to understand each other as brothers rather than merely political opponents. Meanwhile, Mara's role becomes increasingly important because she is not simply Arthur's romantic partner. She is the mother of their child and a powerful Atlantean leader in her own right. Her connection to Atlantis gives her a strong understanding of the political and cultural world Arthur is trying to manage. She also has her own responsibilities and motivations. The family dynamic makes the threat from Black Manta more frightening because Arthur knows that the enemy could target his child. This changes the emotional stakes. A hero who is willing to risk his own life may behave differently when his family is in danger. Arthur's desire to protect his son becomes a major source of urgency. The story therefore connects the superhero conflict with a universal parental fear, the fear of being unable to protect the people you love. Black Manta understands this vulnerability and attempts to exploit it. His revenge becomes increasingly cruel because he wants Arthur to experience the same kind of pain that he believes Arthur caused him. This creates a cycle of revenge in which both sides justify their actions through the suffering of the past. Arthur, however, begins to understand that continuing the cycle will only create more suffering. His responsibility as a father and king forces him to think beyond personal revenge. He cannot allow his anger to determine the future of Atlantis. This gives his conflict with Black Manta a moral dimension. Arthur could simply focus on defeating his enemy, but he must also decide what kind of leader he wants to be. The story repeatedly contrasts Arthur's protective instincts with Black Manta's destructive obsession. Arthur fights because he wants to save people, while Black Manta fights because he wants someone to suffer. Their motivations are fundamentally different. One is driven by responsibility, the other by revenge. The Black Trident makes this contrast even stronger because it represents ancient destructive power. Black Manta believes that greater power will finally give him satisfaction, but the movie suggests that revenge rarely provides the peace people expect. Instead, it consumes the person seeking it. The more Black Manta gains, the more dangerous his obsession becomes. He becomes less capable of imagining a future beyond Arthur's destruction. This makes him a tragic villain as well as a dangerous one. His pain is understandable, but his response to that pain is destructive. Arthur's challenge is to prevent that destruction without becoming consumed by hatred himself. The underwater world continues to expand as Arthur and Orm move beyond the familiar areas of Atlantis. Their journey takes them into mysterious environments and forgotten parts of the ocean. These locations contribute to the feeling that Atlantis is not simply one city but part of a much larger civilization with a complicated history. The idea of a lost kingdom becomes increasingly important. There are places beneath the ocean that have been forgotten, civilizations that have disappeared, and secrets that have remained hidden for thousands of years. The deeper the characters travel, the more they understand that the history of Atlantis is connected to powerful forces that modern Atlanteans barely remember. This sense of discovery gives the movie an adventurous quality. It feels less like a traditional superhero story and more like a fantasy quest. Arthur and Orm are not just chasing a villain. They are searching for knowledge that could help them understand and defeat the threat. The environment itself becomes part of the adventure. Underwater ruins, ancient structures, strange creatures, and dangerous landscapes make every stage of the journey visually distinctive. James Wan uses the underwater setting to create an atmosphere that is different from most superhero films. Characters can move in all directions, creatures can appear from unexpected places, and the scale of the world can suddenly become enormous. This gives the action sequences a sense of spectacle. But the most interesting aspect of these environments is their connection to the character's history. The ruins are not simply beautiful backgrounds. They represent the forgotten past of Atlantis. Arthur is discovering more about the civilization he now rules, while Orm is confronting a history that he once believed he understood. The brothers therefore learn about themselves through the world they explore. The ancient history connected to the Black Trident also introduces the mysterious figure of Kordax and the lost kingdom of Necris. These elements give the story a mythological foundation. The movie suggests that Atlantis's history contains conflicts and tragedies much older than Arthur and Orm. The struggle between brothers is not entirely new. It is connected to ancient patterns of rivalry and power. This makes Arthur and Orm's relationship feel almost symbolic. Their conflict represents a cycle that has repeated throughout Atlantean history, while their decision to cooperate suggests the possibility of breaking that cycle. The idea that history repeats itself is important because Black Manta is also repeating a cycle of revenge. Arthur's challenge is to choose a different path. Instead of answering pain with more pain, he must protect his family and kingdom without becoming the kind of person his enemy wants him to become. This gives the superhero action a deeper emotional meaning. The movie is ultimately about whether characters can escape the mistakes of the past. Arthur's family history is complicated, Orm's history is filled with conflict, and Black Manta is trapped by his father's death. Each character is responding to the past in a different way. Arthur tries to build a future, Orm struggles with losing his old identity, and Black Manta becomes obsessed with revenge. These different responses create the emotional structure of the story. Arthur's role as a father also gives him a new perspective on his own parents. He understands the responsibility of protecting a child in a way he did not fully understand before. His relationship with his father, Tom Curry, also becomes more meaningful because Arthur now experiences fatherhood himself. This creates a generational connection. Arthur once looked to his father for guidance, and now his own child looks to him for protection. The idea of family therefore extends across generations. Nicole Kidman's Atlana also represents the warrior mother figure who understands both love and responsibility. She has always been fiercely protective of her children, and Arthur now begins to understand that kind of protective instinct himself. The movie uses these family relationships to show that being a hero is not only about physical strength. It is also about emotional responsibility. Arthur's greatest challenge may not be defeating an enemy but deciding what kind of father and king he wants to become. This is why the partnership with Orm matters so much. Arthur needs to learn that leadership does not mean doing everything alone. He must trust other people, even someone he once considered his greatest enemy. Orm, meanwhile, must learn that helping Arthur does not make him weak. It may actually be the first step toward redemption. Their relationship slowly moves from hostility toward respect. The comedy between them helps make this transformation enjoyable. Arthur often jokes at Orm's expense, while Orm struggles to tolerate Arthur's casual attitude. Yet beneath their arguments is a growing sense of brotherhood. They begin to recognize familiar qualities in each other. Both are stubborn, both are fiercely protective of Atlantis, and both are willing to risk themselves for their family. Their methods are different, but their goals increasingly overlap. This realization is crucial because it allows them to fight together rather than against each other. The film also emphasizes that power alone is not enough. Black Manta possesses extraordinary power through the Black Trident, but he lacks the emotional balance necessary to use it responsibly. Arthur possesses enormous physical power but must learn political and emotional responsibility. Orm possesses royal knowledge and combat skills but must learn humility. Each major character therefore has something to learn. This makes the story more than a battle between superheroes. It becomes a journey of character development. Black Manta's power may make him stronger physically, but his obsession makes him weaker emotionally. Arthur's greatest strength is not simply his ability to control the ocean. It is his willingness to protect others. Orm's greatest strength eventually becomes his willingness to put aside his pride and help his brother. These qualities become more important than weapons. Another major strength of the movie is the chemistry between Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson. Their contrasting performances make the brother dynamic believable. Momoa's Arthur is energetic, sarcastic, and physically expressive, while Wilson's Orm is restrained, serious, and proud. The contrast allows the movie to create humor without completely losing its dramatic stakes. Their relationship resembles two brothers who have very different personalities but are forced to spend time together. Sometimes Arthur treats the situation too casually, while Orm takes everything extremely seriously. Their arguments therefore provide relief during the darker parts of the story. Yet the humor also serves a deeper purpose. It allows the characters to slowly become comfortable around each other. At first, their interactions are dominated by suspicion and resentment. As they spend more time together, the jokes become less hostile and more affectionate. The audience can sense the relationship changing even before the characters openly acknowledge it. This gradual development makes the eventual brotherly bond more satisfying. The story also uses Arthur's relationship with the surface world to highlight his unique identity. He understands human culture in ways many Atlanteans do not, but he also understands the ocean in ways humans cannot. This dual perspective gives him the ability to imagine cooperation between civilizations. However, it also means he sometimes feels caught between worlds. His kingship forces him to represent Atlantis, while his family ties keep him connected to the surface. Instead of treating this dual identity as a weakness, the movie increasingly presents it as Arthur's greatest strength. He can see problems from both perspectives. This is particularly important when dealing with environmental issues. The health of the ocean cannot be separated from the health of the surface world. Arthur understands that the two civilizations need each other even if they do not fully trust each other. His challenge is convincing others to see the same thing. This makes his leadership journey more interesting than simply becoming a stronger fighter. He is trying to change the way people think. The film's action scenes continue to build toward a larger confrontation with Black Manta. Each encounter reveals that the villain is becoming more dangerous. The Black Trident gives him powers that make ordinary weapons almost irrelevant. Arthur realizes that he cannot defeat this threat through strength alone. He needs information, strategy, and the help of someone who understands ancient Atlantean history. This brings the story back to Orm. The brothers' alliance is therefore not simply a convenient plot device. It is necessary because each possesses something the other lacks. Arthur has the heroic determination and connection to the modern world, while Orm has knowledge of Atlantis's traditions and history. Their partnership represents the combination of past and present. The old and the new must work together to defeat a threat created by the past. This theme becomes increasingly clear as they explore the Lost Kingdom. The ancient world is not simply a place of forgotten treasure. It contains mistakes and dangers that modern Atlantis must understand before it can move forward. Arthur's journey therefore becomes a journey through history. He is learning that being king means understanding where his people came from, not simply controlling where they are going. The environmental storyline reinforces this idea because the ancient use of orichalcum demonstrates how technological advancement without responsibility can create long-term consequences. Atlantis once had enormous power, but it did not always use that power wisely. Arthur now has the opportunity to lead differently. He can choose cooperation and sustainability rather than isolation and exploitation. This makes the film's themes surprisingly connected. Family, environmental responsibility, political cooperation, and the danger of revenge all revolve around the same question: what kind of future will the characters create from the mistakes of the past? Arthur represents the possibility of change. Black Manta represents the refusal to move forward. Orm stands between them, having to decide whether his identity will remain defined by his past or whether he can become something new. As Part 2 progresses, the story becomes increasingly clear about the roles of these three characters. Arthur is the protector who wants to build a future, Black Manta is the avenger trapped by the past, and Orm is the former enemy who has the opportunity to change. Their paths are moving toward a major confrontation. Arthur cannot defeat the threat alone. Black Manta cannot control the ancient power forever without consequences, and Orm must decide whether he is willing to sacrifice his pride for his family. The stakes are becoming larger, but the emotional story remains centered on the brothers. Their journey is not simply about stopping a villain. It is about learning that family can survive conflict if people are willing to change. Arthur and Orm's relationship is still far from perfect, but the first signs of genuine brotherhood are beginning to appear. They start understanding each other's strengths, and their disagreements become less about hatred and more about personality. This is a major transformation from the first movie. The former enemies are becoming allies, and their alliance may ultimately be the key to saving Atlantis. Meanwhile, Black Manta continues moving closer to his goal, driven by a force that may be more powerful than he realizes. His revenge has opened the door to an ancient evil, and the consequences are spreading far beyond his original intentions. The Lost Kingdom is no longer simply a mysterious location. It has become the center of a conflict involving Atlantis's history, Arthur's family, Black Manta's revenge, and the future of the entire world. By the end of this part, the audience understands that the coming battle will test more than Arthur's physical strength. It will test his ability to trust his brother, protect his family, lead Atlantis, and reject the cycle of revenge that has destroyed so many lives before him. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom therefore continues to grow from a straightforward superhero sequel into a large-scale fantasy adventure about family, responsibility, history, and redemption, while maintaining the colorful action and humor that define Arthur Curry's world. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023, Part 3 Long Review. As Arthur Curry and Orm continue their dangerous journey, the story becomes more focused on the mystery surrounding the Black Trident, the ancient kingdom connected to its power, and the forgotten history of Atlantis. What began as a simple mission to stop Black Manta gradually becomes an exploration of secrets that have remained hidden for generations. Arthur understands that defeating Black Manta will require more than his strength, because the enemy is no longer simply using advanced weapons and technology. The Black Trident has connected Black Manta to an ancient force, and that force is powerful enough to threaten the balance between Atlantis and the surface world. Arthur therefore has to depend on knowledge that he does not possess, which is one of the reasons Orm becomes so important to the mission. Their relationship continues to develop throughout the journey, and one of the most entertaining elements is the contrast between their personalities. Arthur is relaxed, sarcastic, and often willing to make jokes even when the situation is dangerous, while Orm remains serious, proud, and uncomfortable with Arthur's casual attitude. At first, their partnership feels almost impossible because both brothers are carrying years of resentment. Orm once believed that Atlantis belonged under his rule, while Arthur defeated him and became king. Orm's loss of the throne is therefore still a painful subject, and Arthur knows that he cannot simply expect his brother to forget the past. Yet circumstances have forced them together, and their shared mission slowly changes the way they see one another. They begin to understand that although they were raised differently, they share many of the same qualities. Both are fiercely protective of Atlantis, both are willing to risk themselves for their family, and both have strong opinions about what the future of their civilization should look like. The difference is that Arthur learned to live between two worlds, while Orm spent most of his life believing that Atlantis had to remain powerful and independent. This difference becomes an advantage during their adventure because Arthur understands the surface world while Orm understands Atlantean tradition and history. Their partnership becomes stronger precisely because they are different. Instead of trying to make one another identical, they begin to use their differences as strengths. This is one of the movie's central ideas about family. Brothers do not have to agree on everything to protect one another. Sometimes family means learning to work with someone whose personality is completely different from your own. Arthur's growth as a leader also becomes more obvious during this part of the story. Earlier, he often viewed leadership through the eyes of a warrior. If there was a problem, his instinct was to confront it directly. But now he is beginning to understand that a king must think beyond individual battles. His decisions affect entire populations, political relationships, and the future of Atlantis. He has to consider the consequences of every action. The threat from Black Manta makes this responsibility even heavier because the danger is spreading beyond a single kingdom. Arthur must protect Atlantis while also preventing the surface world from being destroyed by an ancient power. His position as a bridge between the two civilizations becomes increasingly important. He knows that humans and Atlanteans cannot continue treating each other as completely separate worlds. The ocean connects them, and problems in one world eventually affect the other. The environmental dimension of the story reinforces this idea. Atlantis has advanced technology, but its past use of powerful resources has created consequences for the planet. The ancient substance orichalcum provided enormous energy but also contributed to environmental destruction. This history demonstrates that technological power without responsibility can create long-term damage. Arthur's generation therefore has to learn from the mistakes of the past rather than repeating them. This theme connects naturally with the story's treatment of the Lost Kingdom. The ancient civilization is not simply a forgotten place filled with treasures. It represents a history that contains both achievements and terrible mistakes. The characters are forced to confront the consequences of what earlier generations did. The Black Trident itself is connected to this forgotten history, and Black Manta's decision to use it demonstrates how dangerous ancient power can become when someone is motivated by revenge. Black Manta does not fully understand what he has awakened. He believes the trident will give him enough power to destroy Arthur, but the ancient force connected to it has its own nature and intentions. This creates a feeling of danger beyond ordinary superhero combat. Black Manta is no longer simply a man with advanced technology. He has become connected to something ancient and supernatural. His obsession with Arthur makes him vulnerable because he is willing to sacrifice almost anything to achieve revenge. The tragedy of his character is that his original pain is understandable. He lost his father and blamed Arthur for the circumstances surrounding that loss. However, instead of allowing himself to heal, he allows anger to become the center of his identity. Every step he takes makes it harder for him to return to a normal life. Revenge promises him satisfaction, but the more power he gains, the more destructive his obsession becomes. The movie uses Black Manta to show the difference between justice and revenge. Arthur also has reasons to hate Black Manta. Black Manta has repeatedly threatened his family and kingdom, but Arthur has to resist becoming consumed by the same hatred. As king and father, Arthur cannot allow personal anger to determine every decision. He has to think about the lives of people who depend on him. This creates an important contrast between the two characters. Black Manta allows his personal pain to control his future, while Arthur tries to use his pain as a reason to protect others. Their conflict therefore represents two different responses to suffering. One character chooses destruction, while the other chooses responsibility. The arrival of Orm changes this conflict because Arthur now has someone who understands the history behind the threat. Orm's knowledge of Atlantis and its ancient rulers becomes essential. He knows traditions, legends, and historical details that Arthur never learned while growing up on the surface. This creates a situation in which the former enemy becomes one of the most important people in Arthur's fight. Orm's redemption becomes gradual rather than immediate. He does not suddenly become completely humble, and his desire for recognition does not disappear. Instead, he slowly learns that helping his brother can give him a new purpose. His identity had been built around being king, but now he has lost the throne. He has to discover who he is without that title. This is one of the more interesting emotional elements of the film. Orm has spent his entire life preparing to rule Atlantis, and then Arthur took that position from him. Now Orm is forced to redefine himself. The journey with Arthur gives him an opportunity to become more than the former villain. He can become a brother, an ally, and eventually someone who protects Atlantis for reasons that are not connected to the throne. Arthur also begins to understand Orm more deeply. When Arthur became king, he initially saw the position as a responsibility he had inherited, but he did not fully understand the emotional weight Orm had carried. Now, after experiencing the pressure of leadership himself, Arthur can see why Orm made some of the decisions he made. This does not excuse Orm's actions, but it creates empathy. The brothers begin moving from judgment toward understanding. Their relationship becomes one of the emotional foundations of the movie. Their arguments still provide humor, but the humor increasingly exists alongside genuine affection. Arthur teases Orm because he knows his brother's serious personality, while Orm becomes less hostile toward Arthur's jokes. These small changes are important because they show that the brothers are beginning to trust each other. Their trust is tested repeatedly during the journey. The environments they enter are dangerous, and they must depend on one another to survive. This physical dependence gradually becomes emotional dependence. Arthur realizes that he cannot protect everyone alone, while Orm realizes that helping Arthur does not mean surrendering his dignity. Their partnership becomes a lesson in humility for both characters. The movie also gives Arthur a deeper connection to his role as a father. His son is one of the most important reasons he is determined to stop Black Manta. Arthur's relationship with his child changes the way he sees danger. In his earlier adventures, he could take enormous risks because he was primarily responsible for himself. Now he has a family that depends on him. His decisions have consequences not only for Atlantis but also for the people closest to him. This creates a more mature version of Arthur. He remains humorous and adventurous, but there is a greater sense of responsibility beneath the jokes. The possibility of losing his family makes the threat much more personal. Black Manta understands this vulnerability and sees Arthur's family as a way to hurt him emotionally. This creates a dark parallel between the villain and the hero. Both are motivated by family, but they respond to family loss in opposite ways. Black Manta becomes obsessed with revenge after losing his father, while Arthur becomes determined to protect his child and prevent others from experiencing similar suffering. The movie's emotional message is therefore that family can either become a reason for destruction or a reason to protect and build. Mera also remains important in this family structure. She is not simply a character waiting for Arthur to return. She is a powerful Atlantean figure with her own courage and responsibilities. Her connection to the royal family makes her an important part of Atlantis's political and emotional world. Her relationship with Arthur demonstrates that their partnership is based on more than romance. They are also parents and leaders who must make difficult decisions together. The threat to their child creates a powerful sense of urgency, because the danger is now entering their private life rather than remaining distant from it. Arthur's responsibilities therefore become increasingly interconnected. He has to protect his family, his kingdom, and the wider world at the same time. This is difficult because protecting one may sometimes require risking another. The story constantly raises the question of what Arthur is willing to sacrifice to stop Black Manta. His answer becomes clearer as he understands that the throne does not exist simply to give him power. It exists so that he can protect people who cannot protect themselves. This realization strengthens his character as a king. The underwater environments continue to provide the movie with a sense of adventure. The Lost Kingdom and ancient ruins feel different from the familiar areas of Atlantis, creating the impression that the ocean contains an enormous history that modern Atlanteans barely understand. Arthur and Orm encounter places that challenge their assumptions about the past. The deeper they go, the more they realize that the history of Atlantis is filled with forgotten conflicts and dangerous powers. This exploration adds a fantasy adventure feeling to the movie. It resembles a quest in which the heroes must travel into unknown territory to find answers. The journey also gives Arthur and Orm more opportunities to interact without the distractions of Atlantis's politics. Away from the throne, they can begin to see each other simply as brothers. This is important for Orm because he is no longer surrounded by royal expectations. Without the crown, he has to confront his personality and choices. Arthur, meanwhile, is able to interact with Orm without constantly thinking of him as a political rival. The physical journey therefore becomes an emotional journey as well. The farther they travel from Atlantis, the more their old identities begin to weaken. They are no longer king and former king. They are two brothers trying to save their family and civilization. The action sequences also reflect this transformation. Arthur and Orm begin fighting together rather than against one another. Their combat styles complement each other. Arthur is powerful and instinctive, while Orm is trained and disciplined. Their teamwork is not perfect, but it becomes increasingly effective. This creates some of the movie's most enjoyable action moments because the audience can see their relationship developing through movement. They begin anticipating each other's actions and trusting each other's abilities. The partnership that began as an uncomfortable necessity becomes genuine cooperation. Black Manta, meanwhile, continues increasing the pressure. His forces and technology are more advanced, and the supernatural power of the Black Trident makes him extremely dangerous. He is no longer satisfied with simply confronting Arthur directly. His goal threatens the larger balance of the world. The ancient power he has awakened connects the present conflict to an older history, making the coming confrontation feel inevitable. Arthur and Orm must understand that history if they want to stop him. This gives the movie a mystery element that runs alongside the action. The characters are not simply asking how to defeat Black Manta. They are asking what the Black Trident is, where its power came from, and why it has returned now. These questions create suspense and make the Lost Kingdom important to the overall story. The movie's visual spectacle supports this mystery. The ancient environments are designed to look different from the modern Atlantean cities, emphasizing the passage of time. The audience gets the feeling that the characters are entering a world that has been hidden from ordinary Atlantean civilization. This sense of discovery helps maintain the adventure tone. Even when the story becomes darker, there is still a feeling that the characters are exploring something extraordinary. That balance between fantasy and superhero action is a defining feature of Aquaman's world. Another important theme is the danger of allowing the past to control the present. Arthur's family history includes conflict between his parents, his two worlds, and his relationship with Orm. Orm's identity is shaped by his former position as king. Black Manta's entire existence has become shaped by his father's death. Each character is carrying something from the past. The difference lies in how they respond to it. Arthur tries to create a new future. Orm gradually accepts that he needs to change, while Black Manta refuses to let go. This contrast becomes increasingly important as the story moves toward its final conflict. If Arthur and Orm can cooperate, they can break the cycle of rivalry that has affected their family and kingdom. If Black Manta continues pursuing revenge, he risks repeating the same destruction indefinitely. The film therefore presents forgiveness and cooperation as difficult but necessary alternatives to revenge. This does not mean Arthur forgets the danger Black Manta represents. Instead, it means Arthur refuses to allow hatred to define him. His responsibility as a king and father is greater than his desire for personal revenge. The movie also explores the idea of legacy. Arthur has inherited the legacy of Atlantis, but he does not want to repeat all of its mistakes. Orm inherits a royal identity that he once believed was his destiny, but he must learn that a person's value is not determined by a title. Black Manta inherits grief and anger from his father's death and chooses to turn those emotions into destruction. Each character creates a different kind of legacy through their choices. Arthur's greatest legacy may not be the battles he wins but the future he creates for his son. This is why fatherhood is such an important part of the sequel. Arthur is beginning to think about what kind of world his child will inherit. He does not want the next generation to live under the same conflicts that have affected Atlantis and the surface world. This gives his actions a long-term purpose. He is not simply protecting the present. He is protecting the future. The environmental themes connect directly to this idea of legacy. The damage caused by ancient exploitation shows that decisions can affect generations long after the original people are gone. Arthur therefore has a responsibility to learn from history. The Lost Kingdom becomes a warning as much as a mystery. Its story demonstrates what can happen when power is used without restraint. Black Manta's use of the Black Trident repeats this pattern on a smaller but equally dangerous scale. He believes power will solve his problems, but power without wisdom only creates greater destruction. Orm's journey also reflects this lesson. He once believed that greater military strength would protect Atlantis. Now he is learning that cooperation and understanding may be more valuable than domination. Arthur's approach is different because he naturally seeks connections between worlds. Together, the brothers represent a combination of strength and cooperation. This becomes increasingly important as they approach the heart of the ancient mystery. The story continues to build toward a confrontation where Arthur and Orm will have to put everything aside and trust one another completely. Their relationship has come a long way from the first film. In the beginning, Arthur saw Orm as an obstacle to his identity and throne. Orm saw Arthur as an outsider who had no right to rule Atlantis. Now they are discovering that being brothers may matter more than who sits on the throne. This does not erase their past, but it changes its meaning. Their previous conflict becomes something they can learn from rather than something that must continue forever. This is perhaps the most important emotional development of the sequel. The movie's humor helps make this transformation accessible. Orm's seriousness allows Arthur's jokes to create lighter moments, while Arthur's relaxed personality gradually helps Orm become less rigid. The two characters begin to influence one another. Arthur learns some discipline and respect for Atlantean tradition, while Orm learns to relax and accept a world beyond royal expectations. Their journey is therefore mutually transformative. Neither brother is simply saving the other. Both are changing. Black Manta remains the opposite of this development. He refuses to change because he believes his identity depends on revenge. Even when given opportunities to step away from destruction, his obsession keeps pulling him forward. This makes him a tragic figure. His anger began with genuine pain, but he has allowed that pain to become his entire personality. The movie suggests that revenge can trap a person in the moment when they were hurt. Instead of building a future, they remain focused on the past. Arthur's decision to protect his son represents the opposite approach. He knows that the past cannot be changed, but the future can still be shaped. This distinction becomes central to the emotional meaning of the story. As Part 3 reaches its later stages, the danger surrounding Atlantis becomes more immediate. Black Manta's actions are bringing the ancient threat closer to the surface, and Arthur realizes that waiting is no longer an option. He must act before the situation becomes impossible to control. Orm becomes an essential part of the plan, and their partnership is now based on more than necessity. There is a growing sense of trust between them. They still argue, but the arguments no longer carry the same hatred. Arthur begins treating Orm as a brother rather than a former enemy, and Orm begins responding to Arthur as family rather than as a rival. This emotional change gives the upcoming action greater meaning. If they succeed, they will not only save Atlantis. They will also prove that their family does not have to remain trapped in a cycle of conflict. The Lost Kingdom's secrets therefore become a test of their ability to learn from history. The ancient world created the conditions for the present crisis, but Arthur and Orm have the opportunity to choose a different future. The Black Trident represents the destructive power of the past, while the brothers' alliance represents the possibility of change. Black Manta's obsession pushes him deeper into darkness, while Arthur's responsibility pushes him toward protection and sacrifice. The contrast between these characters gives the story its emotional foundation beneath the enormous action sequences. By the end of Part 3, the audience can see that the coming confrontation will not simply be about who is stronger. It will be about who can control their emotions, who can learn from history, and who is willing to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good. Arthur has grown from a reluctant hero into a king who understands responsibility, while Orm is beginning a journey toward redemption and a new identity. Black Manta, however, remains trapped by revenge and the ancient power he has chosen to embrace. Their paths are now moving toward an unavoidable collision. Atlantis, the surface world, Arthur's family, and the future of the underwater civilization are all connected to the outcome. The brothers must trust each other, Arthur must embrace his role as protector, and the ancient threat must finally be confronted. The adventure is therefore becoming not only larger but also more personal, because every battle now carries the weight of family, history, and legacy. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023, Part 4 Long Review. The journey of Arthur Curry and Orm becomes even more dangerous as the brothers move deeper into the mystery surrounding the Lost Kingdom and the ancient power connected to the Black Trident. And at this stage the movie begins bringing together its major themes of family, sacrifice, environmental responsibility, revenge, and redemption. Arthur has already learned that being king of Atlantis is very different from simply being a superhero, because the throne demands patience, political awareness, and the ability to make decisions that affect countless lives. But the growing threat from Black Manta forces him to return to the role he understands most naturally, protector and warrior. The difference now is that Arthur is no longer fighting only for himself or for the throne. He is fighting for his wife, his son, his parents, his brother, Atlantis, and the surface world. This makes every decision more emotionally significant because Arthur understands that failure could destroy everything he has built. Black Manta's power has grown beyond anything Arthur faced before, and his connection to the Black Trident makes him more than a conventional villain. The ancient force behind the weapon has awakened a dangerous history that Atlantis tried to bury, and the closer Arthur and Orm get to understanding that history, the clearer it becomes that the present crisis is connected to mistakes made thousands of years earlier. This gives the adventure a feeling of discovering a forgotten chapter of mythology. Arthur is not simply traveling through strange locations, he is uncovering the history of the civilization he now rules. Orm becomes especially valuable because his knowledge of Atlantean legends and royal history helps Arthur understand things that were never part of his upbringing. Arthur grew up on the surface, learning about the ocean from his father and discovering his Atlantean heritage only later, while Orm was raised within the traditions of Atlantis and spent his entire life studying its history and preparing to rule. Their different backgrounds become an advantage during the mission. Arthur understands the modern world and thinks creatively, while Orm understands the old world and its traditions. Together they are able to connect the past with the present. Their relationship also continues changing in subtle ways. At the beginning of their journey, Arthur treats Orm as someone he has to tolerate because he needs his help, while Orm sees Arthur as an irritating brother who defeated him and took the throne. But as they face danger together, the old resentment slowly becomes less important. Arthur begins trusting Orm's judgment, and Orm begins respecting Arthur's instincts. Their conversations still contain humor because their personalities are completely different, but there is now a growing sense that they genuinely care about each other. The movie uses this relationship to show that family bonds can survive even after serious conflict. Arthur and Orm spent years on opposite sides, but when a greater threat appears, they discover that their connection as brothers has not disappeared. The partnership also gives Orm an opportunity for redemption. His previous actions caused enormous conflict, and he cannot simply erase that history. However, redemption does not require forgetting the past. It requires making better choices in the present. Orm begins doing exactly that. He agrees to help Arthur even though Arthur is the person who defeated him and took away the life he believed was his destiny. This decision shows that Orm is beginning to place the safety of Atlantis above his personal pride. For someone whose identity was once centered on being king, this is a major change. He is learning that leadership is not defined by a crown. A true leader can serve people even without a title. Arthur, meanwhile, learns an equally important lesson. Strength does not mean doing everything alone. As a king, he has to trust other people and accept that his brother can contribute something valuable. This is especially meaningful because Arthur's natural personality is independent. He often wants to solve problems by jumping into action, but the threat surrounding the Black Trident is too complicated for one person. He needs Orm, Mera, Atlantean forces, and the support of his family. The movie therefore gradually transforms Arthur from a lone superhero into a leader who understands the power of teamwork. Black Manta remains the driving force behind the conflict. His motivation is still revenge against Arthur, but his connection to the ancient power has made his obsession even more dangerous. The Black Trident does not simply provide physical strength. It connects him to the history of Kordax and the lost kingdom of Necrus, revealing that the weapon carries a legacy of destruction. Black Manta believes he is using this power to accomplish his revenge, but he does not fully understand the consequences. The ancient evil connected to the Trident feeds his anger and encourages him to continue down a path that becomes increasingly destructive. His tragedy is that he believes greater power will finally make his pain disappear. Instead, the power only makes his hatred stronger. The film presents this as a warning about revenge. When grief is never allowed to heal, it can transform into an obsession that destroys not only the target but also the person carrying it. Arthur has every reason to hate Black Manta, yet he refuses to allow hatred to become his identity. His responsibilities as a father and king give him a reason to think beyond revenge. He wants to stop Black Manta, but he also wants to prevent innocent people from becoming victims of the same cycle of violence. This contrast between Arthur and Black Manta becomes increasingly powerful as the story moves toward its climax. Both men have experienced loss, but they respond to it differently. Black Manta chooses revenge, while Arthur chooses protection. Black Manta looks backward at what he believes was taken from him, while Arthur looks forward toward what he wants to protect. This difference is the moral center of their conflict. The environmental story also becomes more meaningful because the ancient history of Atlantis demonstrates what happens when a civilization uses powerful resources without considering the consequences. Orichalcum once provided tremendous energy, but its use contributed to pollution and environmental destruction. The ancient Atlanteans eventually had to deal with the consequences of their choices. Arthur now faces the responsibility of ensuring that modern Atlantis does not repeat those mistakes. This makes his kingship more than a political position. He becomes responsible for changing the way Atlantis interacts with the surface world and its own natural environment. Arthur's connection to humans gives him a unique perspective. He understands that Atlantis cannot simply blame the surface world for every problem, just as humans cannot continue ignoring the health of the oceans. Both civilizations are connected. The movie's underwater fantasy therefore becomes a metaphor for the real-world relationship between human society and the natural environment. What happens beneath the ocean eventually affects everyone above it. Arthur understands this more clearly than many of the leaders around him, and his challenge is convincing others to understand it too. His leadership style is based on connection rather than isolation. He wants Atlantis to communicate with the surface world, share knowledge, and become part of a larger solution. This is a significant evolution from the political conflicts of the first movie. Arthur is no longer fighting to decide which world should dominate. He is trying to create a future in which both worlds can coexist. Mara's role in this situation is also important because she understands Atlantis from the inside. Her relationship with Arthur is built on shared responsibility, and she is not simply supporting him emotionally. She is a capable leader and warrior who understands the political realities of the underwater world. Her presence reminds the audience that Arthur's family is a partnership. They are both responsible for protecting their child and their people. The danger surrounding their son raises the emotional stakes because Black Manta is willing to target Arthur's family to achieve revenge. This creates one of the strongest motivations for Arthur. He knows what it means to lose someone he loves, and he refuses to allow his child to become another victim of the conflict. The story therefore connects Arthur's role as a hero with his role as a father. A superhero can sometimes risk his own life without hesitation, but a parent must consider what happens to the people left behind. Arthur's choices become more careful because he understands that his family depends on him. His son represents the future, and protecting that future becomes one of his greatest motivations. The relationship between Arthur and his father, Tom Curry, also gains additional meaning because Arthur now understands fatherhood from a completely different perspective. Tom raised Arthur with love despite the unusual circumstances surrounding his birth and family history. Arthur now has the opportunity to provide the same sense of protection and belonging to his own child. This creates a generational cycle that is much more positive than the cycles of revenge represented by Black Manta and the ancient history of Atlantis. Arthur wants his son to inherit a better world than the one he inherited. This is why the environmental and family themes work together so effectively. Protecting the ocean means protecting the future generation. Protecting Atlantis means protecting the future of his child. Arthur's personal and political responsibilities become one and the same. The Lost Kingdom itself serves as a warning from the past. Its history reveals what can happen when ambition, power, and anger are allowed to control a civilization. The ancient ruler Kordax becomes a symbol of what happens when a leader becomes consumed by darkness. His story parallels Black Manta's current journey. Both characters seek enormous power because they believe power will allow them to control their circumstances. Both become trapped by their own anger. The comparison makes Black Manta's story more tragic because it suggests he is repeating a pattern that has already destroyed another kingdom. Arthur and Orm have the opportunity to break that pattern by choosing cooperation instead of rivalry. This makes the brothers' relationship much more significant than simple comic relief. Their alliance represents a different future for Atlantis. Instead of fighting over the throne, they are fighting for the people. Instead of competing for power, they are sharing their strengths. Orm's transformation becomes particularly satisfying because his greatest challenge is not physical. He has to accept that he is no longer the center of Atlantis's political world. Arthur is king now, and Orm has to decide whether he will remain bitter or become useful. His decision to help Arthur demonstrates genuine growth. He begins to understand that his life can have meaning even without the crown. This is the beginning of a new identity for him. He is no longer simply the villain from Arthur's past. He becomes a brother who is willing to fight beside Arthur. The humor between them continues to make this emotional transition easier for the audience to experience. Arthur's casual behavior repeatedly frustrates Orm, while Orm's formal attitude gives Arthur opportunities to tease him. Yet the jokes also reveal affection. They are beginning to behave like brothers who have finally found a way to communicate after years of conflict. The movie's action sequences become more meaningful because of this relationship. When Arthur and Orm fight together, their teamwork demonstrates that they have learned from one another. Arthur's strength and unpredictability combine with Orm's discipline and knowledge. They are more effective as a team than they would be separately. This is a visual representation of the movie's message that cooperation can transform weakness into strength. The action is also designed to emphasize the enormous scale of the underwater world. Giant creatures, ancient structures, advanced Atlantean technology, and powerful weapons create a sense of fantasy spectacle. But beneath the spectacle is always the emotional story of the characters. Arthur is fighting for his family, Orm is fighting for redemption, and Black Manta is fighting for revenge. These motivations give meaning to the action. Without them, the battles would simply be visual entertainment. With them, each confrontation carries emotional consequences. Black Manta's relationship with the Black Trident also creates a sense that he is losing control. The weapon gives him extraordinary power, but it also connects him to an ancient force that wants to return. This creates tension because the villain is becoming both more powerful and more vulnerable. The more he uses the power, the deeper he becomes trapped by it. His hatred for Arthur makes him easy to manipulate. He believes he is controlling the ancient evil, but in reality his anger is helping that evil regain influence. This is another reason Arthur's emotional discipline becomes important. Arthur must remain focused on protecting people rather than allowing his own anger to control him. The movie repeatedly shows that power without self-control is dangerous. Black Manta is the clearest example, but Arthur and Orm also have to confront their own impulses. Arthur has to control his instinct to act alone, while Orm has to control his pride. Their growth is therefore connected to the central conflict. The villain's weakness is emotional obsession, while the hero's strength is their ability to trust and cooperate. The story also gives Dr. Stephen Shin a role in the larger conflict by connecting the surface world to Atlantean technology. His fascination with Atlantis demonstrates humanity's desire to discover the unknown, but it also raises questions about responsibility. Knowledge can be valuable, but using powerful technology without understanding it can create danger. Black Manta's access to Atlantean weapons is an extreme example of this problem. The film therefore suggests that technological advancement must be accompanied by wisdom. Atlantis has advanced far beyond the surface world technologically, but its ancient mistakes show that technology alone does not create a better civilization. Arthur's leadership has the opportunity to combine technological knowledge with environmental responsibility. This is one of the ways the sequel attempts to expand the world of Aquaman beyond simple superhero battles. The story is also concerned with the idea of legacy. Every major character is connected to something inherited from the past. Arthur inherits the throne and the complicated legacy of Atlantis. Orm inherits the royal expectations that shaped his identity. Black Manta inherits grief and anger from his father. The ancient characters leave behind weapons, kingdoms, and mistakes. The question is what the current generation will do with those inheritances. Arthur's answer is to transform them. He does not want to repeat the isolation and mistakes of previous rulers. Orm's answer is to accept that he can contribute without ruling. Black Manta's answer is to continue the cycle of revenge. These choices define the characters more than their superpowers do. The emotional difference between Arthur and Black Manta becomes especially clear when Arthur's family is threatened. Arthur experiences fear and anger, but his instinct is still to protect. Black Manta experiences pain and responds by seeking more destruction. The film suggests that strength is not measured by how much damage someone can cause. True strength is the ability to remain compassionate and responsible even when facing enormous pain. Arthur's role as a father makes this lesson more powerful because he understands that the future depends on his choices. His son will inherit the world he helps create. This makes the battle with Black Manta more than a personal confrontation. It becomes a battle over what kind of future will exist. The Lost Kingdom represents a future destroyed by unchecked power, while Arthur's family represents the possibility of rebuilding something better. Orm's redemption reinforces this idea. His past cannot be erased, but his future can be different. He can choose to use his abilities to help instead of dominate. This is one of the movie's most hopeful messages. People are not permanently defined by their worst decisions. They can change if they accept responsibility and make different choices. Orm's journey is therefore one of the clearest examples of redemption in the film. His willingness to help Arthur demonstrates that even someone who once stood against the hero can become part of the solution. The relationship between Arthur and Orm also gives the movie an emotional heart that balances the massive scale of the adventure. Their story is ultimately about two brothers who were divided by different worlds, different ambitions, and different understandings of power. Now they have an opportunity to repair that division. Their partnership is not perfect, but it is genuine. They begin to realize that their shared blood and shared responsibility matter more than their old rivalry. This emotional change gives their final battles additional weight because the audience understands what they are fighting to protect. They are not just saving Atlantis. They are protecting a family that has finally begun to heal. As the story moves closer to its final confrontation, the tension increases because Black Manta's plan is becoming increasingly dangerous. The ancient power associated with the Black Trident threatens to destroy the balance between worlds, and Arthur realizes that stopping it may require a sacrifice. The movie begins preparing the audience for the idea that victory may come at a cost. Arthur has always been willing to risk himself, but now he has to consider the consequences of his decisions for his family and kingdom. Orm also faces the possibility that redemption may require him to give up something important. His journey has taught him that being a hero is not about receiving recognition. Sometimes the most meaningful acts are the ones nobody celebrates. This becomes an important part of his transformation. He is learning to act because something is right rather than because he wants power. Black Manta, however, continues moving in the opposite direction. The more he learns about the power he has awakened, the more deeply he becomes committed to using it. His hatred has reached a point where turning back seems almost impossible. He is no longer simply fighting Arthur. He is fighting against the possibility of accepting the past. This makes the final confrontation inevitable. Arthur and Orm represent cooperation and redemption, while Black Manta represents revenge and destruction. The ancient evil behind the Black Trident represents the consequences of allowing hatred and ambition to grow unchecked. The three forces are moving toward a collision. The visual scale of the final stages is matched by the emotional stakes. Arthur has to protect his family, Atlantis has to protect its people, Orm has to prove that he has changed, and Black Manta has to face the consequences of his choices. The movie's themes are therefore converging at the same point. Family, environment, history, and personal responsibility all become connected. Arthur's greatest strength is not his trident or his ability to command sea creatures. It is his willingness to put other people's safety before his own desires. Orm's greatest achievement is not reclaiming power but learning to let go of it. Black Manta's greatest weakness is that he cannot let go of the past. This contrast gives the story a clear emotional direction. By the end of Part 4, Arthur and Orm are no longer simply reluctant partners. They are becoming true brothers, united by a responsibility that is larger than their old rivalry. Their journey through the Lost Kingdom has forced them to confront the history of Atlantis and the consequences of ancient mistakes. Black Manta's connection to the Black Trident has made the threat more dangerous, but it has also exposed the weakness behind his power: his inability to escape revenge. Arthur's challenge is to defeat that threat without becoming consumed by hatred himself. His family gives him a reason to fight for the future rather than the past, while Orm's redemption gives the story another example of someone choosing change over revenge. The Lost Kingdom has become a symbol of what happens when power is used without wisdom, and Arthur now has the opportunity to lead Atlantis differently. The brothers have learned that their greatest strength comes from cooperation, and the stage is now set for the final confrontation that will determine the fate of Atlantis, the surface world, and Arthur's family. The journey that began with a king trying to manage his kingdom has transformed into a battle for the future, and the final stages will test whether Arthur, Orm, and the people they love can overcome an enemy empowered by the darkest parts of Atlantis's forgotten past. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, 2023, Part 5 Long Review. As the story moves deeper into its final phase, Arthur Curry and Orm are forced to confront not only Black Manta but also the ancient darkness connected to the Black Trident, and the emotional importance of their mission becomes clearer because the battle is now about protecting an entire future rather than simply defeating one enemy. Arthur has changed significantly throughout the journey. He is still the humorous and fearless hero audiences recognize, but his responsibilities as a husband, father, and king have made him more aware of the consequences of his choices. In the beginning, Arthur often treated danger with jokes and confidence, but now he understands that his actions can affect Atlantis, the surface world, and the people closest to him. His greatest challenge is balancing his instinct to fight with his responsibility to protect. He cannot simply charge into every battle without thinking because his family and kingdom depend on him. This new maturity gives his character more emotional depth. Arthur's relationship with Orm becomes the strongest example of his growth. The two brothers began as enemies, divided by their different backgrounds and competing claims to the throne, but their journey has transformed that rivalry into an unexpected partnership. Orm has spent much of his life believing that strength and authority were necessary to protect Atlantis, but his defeat and imprisonment forced him to question everything he believed about leadership. Now, working alongside Arthur, he is discovering that true strength can also mean humility, sacrifice, and loyalty. He does not need the crown to prove his value. His knowledge, combat abilities, and understanding of Atlantean history are valuable even when he is not king. This realization becomes an important part of his redemption. Arthur also begins to see Orm differently. Instead of thinking about the brother who once tried to take his throne, Arthur starts recognizing the person underneath the title. Orm is proud and serious, but he also loves Atlantis and his family. The two brothers have different personalities, but they share a deep sense of responsibility. Arthur's humor and Orm's seriousness create a constant contrast, yet their differences make them effective partners. Arthur approaches problems with instinct and creativity, while Orm relies on knowledge, discipline, and tradition. Their teamwork shows that strength can come from combining different perspectives. This is especially important because the threat they face is unlike anything either brother has encountered alone. Black Manta is no longer merely a technologically advanced human enemy. His connection to the Black Trident has awakened an ancient force that threatens to overwhelm the modern world. The Trident represents a dangerous combination of ancient power and modern ambition. Black Manta believes that possessing this weapon makes him unstoppable, but the more he relies on it, the more he becomes connected to the darkness behind it. His revenge has become so powerful that he no longer cares about the consequences. His original goal was to destroy Arthur, but the consequences of his actions now threaten millions of people. This is what makes his villainy increasingly tragic. He began with personal grief, but his refusal to move beyond that grief transforms him into someone willing to destroy everything around him. The movie uses him to explore the destructive nature of revenge. Revenge can begin with a real injustice or pain, but if it becomes the center of someone's identity, it can grow beyond its original purpose. Black Manta no longer fights simply because he believes Arthur wronged him. He fights because hatred has become the reason he exists. Arthur, meanwhile, has reasons to hate Black Manta too. The villain has attacked his family, threatened Atlantis, and caused enormous destruction. But Arthur's responsibilities force him to choose another path. He cannot allow personal anger to determine his decisions. As a father, he understands the importance of protecting the next generation. As king, he understands that innocent Atlanteans should not suffer because of his personal conflict. As a brother, he now understands the importance of trusting Orm. These relationships create a network of responsibilities that keeps Arthur grounded. His greatest strength therefore comes not from his supernatural abilities but from his connections to other people. The ancient kingdom connected to the Black Trident also becomes more important as the characters learn about its history. The lost civilization of Necrus and the story of Kordax demonstrate that Atlantis has experienced darkness before. Kordax's desire for power and his willingness to use dangerous forces created destruction that eventually buried his kingdom. The Black Trident carries that history into the present. Black Manta is essentially reopening an old wound. The past that Atlantis tried to forget has returned, and Arthur must confront it before it destroys the future. This is one of the movie's strongest recurring ideas. History cannot simply be ignored. If people refuse to learn from the past, they risk repeating its mistakes. Orm understands this because he has lived through the consequences of political ambition. Arthur understands it because he has seen the conflict between Atlantis and the surface world. Black Manta, however, refuses to learn. He repeats the same cycle of anger and destruction because he believes his suffering gives him permission to cause suffering. The contrast between the brothers and Black Manta becomes increasingly clear. Arthur and Orm are learning from their mistakes, while Black Manta is allowing his mistakes to define him. The environmental storyline reinforces this message. Atlantis once relied heavily on orichalcum, a powerful energy source that helped build its advanced civilization but also caused serious environmental damage. The ancient Atlanteans eventually faced the consequences of their choices, and the modern world is still dealing with the results. Arthur's role as king gives him the opportunity to change the relationship between Atlantis and the surface world. Instead of maintaining secrecy and separation, he wants cooperation. This represents a major change in Atlantean politics. For centuries, the underwater civilization has remained hidden and suspicious of humans. Arthur believes that isolation is no longer enough. The surface world and the ocean are connected, and both civilizations need to accept responsibility for the planet they share. His leadership therefore has a larger purpose than maintaining Atlantis's power. He wants to create a future in which Atlantis can contribute to solving global problems rather than remaining hidden beneath the sea. This vision also gives Arthur a reason to use his royal position differently from previous rulers. He does not want to rule through fear or superiority. He wants to build relationships. This is another reason Orm's redemption is important. Orm once believed that Atlantis needed to dominate the surface world to protect itself. Now he can see the value of Arthur's approach. The brothers therefore represent two stages in the evolution of Atlantis. Orm represents the old mindset of power and isolation, while Arthur represents a new approach based on cooperation. Their alliance symbolizes the possibility of combining the wisdom of the past with the possibilities of the future. The family storyline becomes increasingly emotional as the thread moves closer to Arthur's son. Arthur's child represents innocence and the future, which makes the villain's attempt to use him particularly disturbing. Black Manta sees Arthur's family as a weakness, but Arthur sees his family as a source of strength. This difference is crucial. The villain believes that love creates vulnerability, while Arthur discovers that love creates purpose. Arthur's desire to protect his son motivates him to become more responsible and determined. He is not fighting because he wants glory. He is fighting because he wants his child to grow up in a safer world. This makes the final conflict more personal than a normal superhero battle. Arthur's family is not simply something he might lose. It represents everything he has worked to build. His father taught him compassion and resilience, his mother connected him to Atlantis, Mera became his partner and queen, and his son represents the future. All of these relationships come together in his identity. Arthur is no longer simply the man who can command the ocean. He is a father and king who carries the hopes of two worlds. Mera's role becomes particularly meaningful in this context. She has her own strength and determination, and her connection to the royal family gives her a direct stake in the future of Atlantis. She is not merely supporting Arthur from the sidelines. She understands the danger and takes responsibility for protecting their family. Her relationship with Arthur demonstrates that leadership can be shared. Both of them are willing to make difficult decisions for their child and their people. This creates a more mature family dynamic than a simple superhero romance. The movie also uses the relationship between Arthur and his father Tom to highlight the importance of family legacy. Arthur's human upbringing gave him a perspective that makes him different from traditional Atlantean rulers. Tom taught him that family is about love rather than status. This lesson becomes increasingly important as Arthur tries to lead Atlantis. He does not want his son to grow up believing that a crown determines his worth. Instead, he wants his child to understand responsibility, compassion, and connection. This creates a positive generational cycle that contrasts with Black Manta's relationship to his father's death. Black Manta's father becomes a source of endless anger, while Arthur's father becomes a source of wisdom and love. The difference between these two relationships explains much about the men they become. Arthur carries his father's lessons forward, while Black Manta carries his father's death forward. One creates hope, the other creates destruction. The action sequences during this stage of the movie reflect the emotional intensity of the story. Arthur and Orm are now fighting as a genuine team, and their cooperation demonstrates how far they have come. They anticipate each other's movements and use their different abilities effectively. Arthur's physical strength and connection to the ocean combine with Orm's knowledge and combat training. Their teamwork also creates